Hello and welcome to the European Resilience Initiative Center video podcast. Today our guest is Alina Frolova, who is a deputy chairperson at the Center for Defense Strategies in Ukraine, and she was a deputy minister of defense of Ukraine in 2019-2020. Welcome, Alina.
Good morning, everyone.
We have the war of Russia against Ukraine, which doesn't go since 2 years. It goes since 10 years and started with occupation of Crimea and Russia's invasion in Donbass, Donetsk and Luhansk regions. And now we are talking about how this occupation of Crimea can be stopped. And can it be stopped? Can Crimea be liberated by military means? Is it possible?
Well, of course, it's possible. Why not? Everything depends from the capabilities which we obtain and which our enemy obtain. And frankly speaking, all the military experts whom I'm talking to, they're saying that the liberation of Crimea from the military point of view is much easier task than liberation of the so-called mainland territories like Donbass and Lugansk regions. Because the Crimea is a peninsula and geographically, and it's like quite an isolated area, and we see that within this war, Ukrainian army was using this tactic when we cut off logistic routes, when we cut off supplies, and afterwards the army of Russia became much weaker, and actually the offensive became much easier. With Crimea, these tactics can work even better because we have quite a limited supply chains. So as soon as we approach the peninsula itself, this is like a small bridge to the peninsula, and cut off the Kerch bridge, cut off the land supplies, the liberation of Crimea would be just a matter of a time of few months is when the army to be exhausted. And what we see from now, that we see that Ukraine already is substantially limited capabilities of supplies, of connection of Russia through the sea. So with this quite an active operation of Ukraine on the sea domain, Russia is not so active and not so flexible. So I would say that this looks like a shaping operation already. But of course, we're highly dependent from the supplies of the long-range missiles, for example, to disconnect the Kerch bridge. But technically, this operation is highly possible, and I think that we will see some kind of increasing of this shaping activities quite soon.
Indeed, what we are discussing now looks to be counterintuitive because we know that on the front line, along this around 2,000 kilometers front line, we have something what many call stalemate. I personally don't believe it's a stalemate, but of course the situation is dire with the lack of ammunition, with the lack of long-range missiles. Germany doesn't send Taurus missiles. Ukraine still has problems around Avdiivka, Kupiansk, and other towns. But when we're talking about Crimea, you say that as soon as Ukrainian army comes to the territory of Crimea, the situation will dramatically change and Russia will not have any advantage there. Did I understand you correctly?
Yeah, absolutely. If you cut the supplies, you give just a few months and most of the army won't have enough food, ammunition, and all the other part of it we consider will be evacuated by itself from Crimea, yes, using the different opportunities. So I don't think that we will even facing some kind of a heavy land operations. However, the military experts would know this better. But as we discussed before with you also, historically Crimea was always occupied or deoccupied by the military power, yes, by military operations. It never was passing from one side to another in some kind of diplomatic ways. Yes, it was always a military pressure, which looks already started with this disconnection. As I said, Russia relocated most of the ships from Crimea to Novorossiysk ports facilities. And so they trying to hide as much as possible capabilities from Crimea, relocate to some other parts, because Ukraine is already reaching Crimea, reaching quite actively. Again, we are limited with missiles capabilities, but we actively using drones. And the more Ukraine developed the long-range drones, the worse situation with Russia presence in Crimea is, because before they were like quite inactively using these sea platforms, for example, for shelling Ukraine, or airports for locating their fighter jets, which is not so already now. So we like observe now substantial decrease of the land, sea launches of the missiles on from the Russian ships to Ukraine, and we observe that many airports were evacuated. So we see how Russia already squeezing its capabilities from Crimea because they feel unsafe.
That is amazing what we are observing, as you mentioned before, the drones wars and the UAV drones against the land target, and naval drones against the naval targets. We're talking about how Crimea can be liberated by military means with Alina Frolova, who is a deputy chairperson at the Center for Defense Strategies in Ukraine, and she also was a deputy minister of defense of Ukraine in 2019-2020. Don't forget to subscribe, to like, to share this channel. If you have your ideas, write them under this video. Alina, you have already mentioned these drone strikes against Russian forces, and Ukraine has destroyed, if I'm not mistaken, at least 30% of Russia's Black Sea Navy. What is the secret of Ukrainian success here? Ukraine is not a country which had naval capacities, and now Ukraine practically interdicted Russia's fleet from at least part of the Black Sea.
I think that Ukraine's maritime strategy in this war, it's actually something which was declared as a necessary strategy for the future and for the current one, fortunately. It means that we need to use the very asymmetrical approach, very innovative, because we can never compare Ukrainian potential capabilities with Russian. I mean that we always will have less people, less weapons, less munition, because of the size, just because of the level of preparation. So we cannot just overcome them with standard capabilities like it was used in the Second World War or in other wars. So we need to invent something more innovative. We need to invent something more flexible and very asymmetric. The sea drones, it's like a very, very good example of how it can happen. Yes, you're absolutely right that it's already around 30% of the actual numbers, but this means not only 30% of decreasing of capability, it means much more in capabilities, because this is you cannot just apply this number of capabilities. The capabilities actually, I would say, decreased more than half, because first of all they lost one of the biggest situational awareness ship. I'm telling about the Moskva, yes, which was used for covering the situational awareness purposes and covering the protection, defense purposes. They lost a lot of maneuver ships, small maneuver ships. They lost a lot of those which were used for transportation, and they actually almost lost the capabilities of deploying the troops, amphibious operations, because many ships of these vessels of this type were eliminated. So we're speaking about much more serious capabilities loss than only 30%. And as I said, also they relocated some ships from Crimea to Novorossiysk, but Novorossiysk port is not applicable for keeping up such a high a readiness fleet, and that makes them a trouble. That's why Russians try now to use the Georgian waters and Georgian ports for placement of some kind of their fleet, but still it just decreases their ability to react, it just decreases their ability to make the strikes and operations on the Black Sea. And you see that we use it now for making our own grain corridor, which we don't need to, coordinate with someone, which we are not dependent on someone's decision on negotiations, and the corridor is working quite well. We just increased transportation of goods from Ukraine to the level already before the invasion. And I think that's a great achievement, and that's great, a proof that these asymmetric methods are working.
You have mentioned the necessity to destroy Kerch Bridge, which connects the Crimean territory with Russia. Over several kilometers long bridge, and using the Tuzla island close to the Russian shore. But Ukraine tried to destroy that bridge with naval drones and with some other attacks during the last months. And none of these attacks was a full success. The bridge was damaged partly, but repaired later once again and again. And it seems that naval drones, with all their capacities, cannot destroy the bridge. What is the problem there?
Well, the problem is that the bridge is like a construction which needs to be destroyed with some massive explosives, and no one of drones can just bear such an explosives, and no any drones for now can just hit those points which are crucial for a strength of the construction. And that is why we're speaking about necessity to guard the possible types of the long-range missiles. If we speak about Germany, this is Taurus, and this is one of the principal capabilities we need to destroy it effectively. There could be not only Taurus, but some other missiles with some proper characteristics, but I would say that Taurus is the most reachable for us, for now. Unfortunately, as we see, still we have some kind of excuses from Germany, from Scholz, whatever happens, we have a different type of excuses, and all these excuses are actually not very trusted, because we saw that some of them are using arguments which are not applicable to the situation, and we also, all of us heard this discussion of the German military personnel, which was discussing that it's only about 10-15 missiles what needed to broke up the bridge actually. So I hope that with all the efforts, with collective efforts, we will reach the purpose, and we will just somehow to ensure, Mr. Scholz, that we need them for not only for Ukraine, yes, but for establishing the security situation in the Black Sea, decreasing substantially the capabilities of Russia, which is required now, and which is all the European leaders are speaking about now. And I would like also to explain that the longer we, don't make some critical moves, the longer the war will continue, and the more expenses will be borne by Ukraine, of course, but also by the European countries, because finally I think that most of the leaders declared that they do understand that this is the war not only of Ukraine, but this is the war which directly threatens, physically threatens to the most of European countries, including Germany.
And that is exactly what I personally cannot accept in the position of our German Chancellor Scholz, as he says that the destruction of Crimea Bridge would harm Russia so much that it will make Russia suffer. That is why we will not deliver it, because it can provoke Russia, etc. But this war is about make Russia suffer to that extent that they remove their troops from illegally occupied territories of Ukraine. It's not about talking to Putin or Lavrov or whoever and say, please kindly remove your troops, otherwise we will be very sad. No, it's about demonstrating our capacities and capabilities to hurt them, and that is exactly what Ukraine is doing with all the means Ukraine has. But coming back to the drones, We know that currently Ukraine produces a lot of drones of different kind. Are these more private initiative, state initiative, private state initiatives, and is there not like some sort of overcapacity in producing drones? As we know, for the naval sea drones, for the naval drones, Ukraine has at least two agencies which deal with these strikes.
Well, no one knows how much Ukraine produces now, actually, yes, because we don't have, and I think it's very right, we don't have all the list of the all producers, and as you said, that there are like a lot of initiatives starting from the small workshops where the people collecting drones to the like big industrial enterprises which produces. Of course, if we're speaking about those naval drones, I believe they are like produced in quite a industrial way. Because they need just combination of the high tech, they need the combination of the quite like a good production facilities. Those drones which are produced by population or small production, they are mainly FPV drones, which are like with characteristics of the short range, with like they less military, more let's say civilian, used for military operation. However, we need more and more these like big military drones, which are more precise, which are long range, which can bear a lot of like destruction power on board. And so we see here private initiatives. We see here like a public-private partnership when the government cooperates with the private companies. We see efforts of our partners who also promise to supply some drones like or UAV like quite a big one. So this is like some kind of massive operation now. We don't obviously don't have overcapacity, so we still need a lot of them. We still need a lot of them also because we need to compensate lack of ammunition, lack of long-range missiles, lack of other capabilities which Ukraine doesn't obtain. But even should we have an ideal situation with the ammunition, with the artillery, with like long-range missiles, still drones would be heavily used in this war because they are still cheaper. They are less obvious for observations. They are like a more flexible weapon, which give us a weapon or tool, which give us some kind of possibility to use it massively, and therefore spread attention of our enemy. And what else we should say that speaking about drones, we should understand that the cycle of this operation, yes, is quite fast. So we have, if you try something new, you have like a 2-3 months as maximum before Russian will understand how to deal with it and will try to copy the technology. And so even having like established production, you need constantly develop and redevelop your equipment, your drones, whatever you use there, to protect it better from electronic warfare, to protect it better from the like vision, the vision technologies. So it's like a constant development which is required, and I believe that within this war, drones and UAVs demonstrated that actually we have a combination of very classical approach with very innovative approach, and it will continue. We see that how, like Iran, for example, actively developed these technologies just because they're cheaper, just because they can be used, and I think that many other countries are now looking at this war. They started to develop these technologies, and we will face with more and more drones operation in small wars, in some kind of local wars. So that's something which we are already in.
Indeed, and Ukraine is turning into a powerhouse of military R&D. Regarding like the drones, and we can clearly see the amount of knowledge in the hands of Ukraine's army is amazing, and technology is also develops like the new things like starting from AI for the FPV drones up to systems which many believed nobody needs, but now they currently control the Black Sea in absence of a navy. We are talking to Alina Frolova, who is a deputy chairperson at the Center for Defense Strategies in Ukraine, and she was a deputy minister of defense of Ukraine in 2019-2020. Don't forget to like, to share, to subscribe to this channel as well. Alina, we have already talked about the very clear option to deoccupy Crimea by military means. As you said, it's enough to cut the Crimea bridge and for the Ukrainian army to come close to the land from the north in Crimea, and the Russian army in Crimea will be cut from most of its supplies and will have to capitulate. But what comes next? First, will there be any reactions by Russia, by Kremlin, by Putin, you name it, which Germany Chancellor Scholz is so much afraid of? And after the liberation of Crimea, what is Ukraine's policy towards Crimea, which has been under occupation for 10 years, including all the demographic changes? The Russians brought a lot of people from Russia to Crimea and settled them down there.
Well, reaction, the first question. Yes, so we've been promised by Medvedev, everyone knows him, yes, like one of the Russian so-called leaders, that the first hit at Crimea will be a red line, which will activate like a massive reaction, and with the threats of the usage of tactical nuclear weapons. We see that this didn't happen. It never happened with, I don't know, Abrams, with the HIMARS, with other equipment. However, we all the time have been hearing from the Russia that they will activate all their power in case of such a supplies. So I think that potential use of the tactical nuclear weapons, which is the last, let's say, last word in Russian threats, usually for now, is very low as for now. We don't see the possibility or like intention, real intention of Russia to use it. However, we should understand that, for example, for Ukraine, it will change nothing. It's just like another type of the weapons. And 86% of population, of Ukrainian population, said that even in case of usage of tactical nuclear weapons, we are not ready to negotiate. And if we compare the potential losses of Ukraine from usage of Russians of tactical nuclear weapons, I believe it still will be less than what we had in Mariupol, which we cannot evaluate now, but we can just expect the losses among civilians. And I know that it just like sounds a little bit like a frightful, but this is war, and we're losing people every day. And I don't think that they cannot change like a strategically course of war with usage of tactical nuclear weapons. That it has no sense even for Russians to use it. And I don't think that they will be ready to escalate to such an extent that potentially NATO can react at usage of tactical nuclear weapons. So all these like arguments makes the usage of nuclear weapons quite less. All the other, they're already using, they heavily using the chemical weapons, which is prohibited by all the conventions, but it's like a heavy use of that. What else can be, like, will they attack the NATO country? I don't think so, because they don't have, again, they don't have a free capabilities till the time they are heavily engaged in land operation. With Ukraine, they are not able to attack the NATO. So, like choosing among the variety of possible escalations, we don't see any. I mean, nothing which they didn't use already. And that is why I think that this is like a very typical tactic of escalation for the escalation, which is not working, but they still continue to use it because they like get acquainted to it. As for future plans, so Ukraine already for for a few years developed some kind of strategies and approaches which we as Ukraine plan to use in Crimea and other occupied territories. I cannot say that this is already, like a completed plan with all the actions, with all the preparations done, but there are like some kind of concepts, draft concepts, some of them already adopted as a documents, which are speaking about what would be the policy in Crimea, what would be the policy of deploying people there from security and defense sector, what would be the policy of deploying the civil servants to Crimea, to which extent we can use local people, involve them into some kind of production services and so on. And there is also a touching of this, like a policy towards Russian population, which deployed now in Crimea. And there is not yet adopted laws on this, but this is the discussion in Parliament of Ukraine, among experts, in all the agencies which are involved, and basic agreement as for now among all the stakeholders who are involved in process is that those Russians who moved to Crimea after the occupation, they actually violated the law of Ukraine. They illegally crossed border, and we will apply the law like any other countries for those illegal immigrants, which means that they should leave the Crimea. Of course, there would be difficult cases, for example, with the mixed families which appeared at that moment, or with kids which were born in Crimea and had no chances to receive the Ukrainian citizenships and Ukrainian birth certificate. But this is some scope of problems which our experts, Ukrainian experts, are working together with the government now. And I think that till the moment of liberation of Crimea, most of the policies will be adopted.
So now we have some sort of legal discussion in Ukraine, or some working groups which prepare the steps after the liberation of Crimea.
Yeah, some work was done under the Office of the Representative of the President of Crimea. We have such an agency in Ukraine, so they initiated like a few working groups. Then part of the work is done in Parliament, part of the work is done in National Security and Defense Council, which always involves the civilian experts and civil servants to develop together develop these documents, because they actually covers quite a huge number of aspects, and they need to develop a reintegration policy. For example, many of kids who grow up in Crimea within these 10 years, they don't know Ukrainian because there were no schools with Ukrainian language, and in accordance with Ukrainian law, all our education are in Ukrainian language. So there should be some kind of transition policies which should be adopted, which give the floor for those kids to get the good education, but this transitional period with language, with some other issues, should be adopted.
But what wonders me is that we see now, obviously, in Crimea, a spike in opposition, in resistance, and many of those who participate in resistance in different kinds, like starting from chanting pro-Ukrainian slogans in the street up to painting Ukrainian symbols on the walls, they are teenagers. They have never lived as very small kids in free Ukraine. All their life they spent in occupation, and now suddenly they start to resist. What has triggered this resistance? Is it war and all the news from the front line?
Well, I think that before 2022, unfortunately, there were no clear perspective of bringing Crimea back to Ukraine. People were under occupation, under oppression, under the threat of their lives, and they didn't see the possibility for the next 10 years, for example, for Crimea to come back. The full-scale invasion completely changed the situation. I mean that, first of all, everyone saw that Ukraine not only is able to resist, to make a resilience, but also is able to release the territories, that the army is strong, that there is there are all the limitations on non-military means usage or something like that, because we do remember that it's always were a discussion about only diplomatic means toward Crimea, and all our partners were insisting on such a wording in all the official documents. So all these limitations gone. I mean that everyone understands that this is war, this is military means, military operations, that Russia has no intention to live by their goodwill. They can leave the Crimea and other occupied territory only in result of military operations. And people saw that these operations are possible and they are feasible, that the releasing of Crimea is some kind of feasible perspective. And of course, in this situation, many of them activated. For me, it's also a good sign that there are so big number of young people among them. It means that people are still, these young people, they are more educated, they are more flexible in the perception of situation, they more use like internet as a source of information, they see everything what's going on. And I think that this is a very good sign. I think that's a very good sign that we didn't lost all the young generation because of the propaganda which Russia implies there, because of the militarization of education which Russia implies in Crimea. So, and I think that they still have a connection with the mainland. They have friends, they exchange their opinions, and this is all makes them willing to make this resilience, to demonstrate that they are waiting for Ukraine. And I think that another factor also very important. To be Ukrainian is very prominent now. We all proud of being Ukrainians because this is the nation which demonstrates like a very high morale, very high dedication to principles, and this is something which is very bright. And I think that for young people to orient at such a bright picture, to be part of such a bright nation, is much more interesting than to be a part of the very old school, non-democratic, non-developed nation, as like a political nation as Russia today is.
Indeed, and Ukraine is demonstrating not only resilience but also a lot of success. Ukraine has liberated a third of its territory which had been occupied by Russia. Ukraine is halting attacks of the Russian army, which uses all types of equipment, or almost all types of equipment they have. And Ukraine is demonstrating its will to win this war and to liberate every inch of its territory. Thank you for this interview. It was Alina Frolova, who is a deputy chairperson at the Center for Defense Strategies in Ukraine. She was a deputy defense minister of Ukraine in 2019-2020. Thank you for this interview.
Thanks a lot, and I wish to everyone to have a clear mind. Yes, do not afraid to make actions and steps, because we are living in very historical times. And later on you will be telling your kids what you were doing in this period. Were you supporting Ukraine? Were you supporting the peace, which can be reached only by defeating Russia? Or you were just observing? Thank you.
Thank you so much for these inspiring words. Indeed, stay on Ukraine's side, stay with Ukraine, support Ukraine, do what you can. And don't forget to like, to share, and to subscribe to this channel too, and wait for the new interviews with the Ukrainian voices. Thank you so much.